So today we're going to do an optical mixing demo. And what that means is when you have dots, very small dots, of pure colors, right? So I like to call them colors out of the two, but I'm going to stick to our co-set of primaries that we use, right? So 2 different reds, 2 yellows, 2 blues. I'm going to include phthalo green in the mix just because I think that's a kind of nice color to add. And I'm going to have white. So you are welcome to also use black as a pure dot, but as we learned from our last assignment where you guys were kind of co-mixing all 3 primaries to create your own version of a very dark neutral, is that you can get the appearance of black pretty easily without necessarily having to have it out of the tube, right? So I'm going to do a quick demonstration. So it's all about the brush when it comes to optical mixing, because essentially what I'm going to try to make is these individual dots of pure color that when they're sat next to other colors, they kind of, your eye does the rest of the mixing, right? So instead of like mixing an orange, I'm just going to strategically place yellow and red dots near each other. So as you pull away, you start to get that appearance of like a soft blended tone or shade, right? So I have this very used round brush. It's going to be great for this because even though, I can't pull my bristles together to get that fine detail like this brush is meant for, it's going to be great because you see that all of these bristles are now apart. And so instead, I'm going to do this in blue so you guys can see the color a little bit more. I can kind of dab, and I'm going to get a lot of little dots all at once, right? So you don't necessarily want your dots to be huge, right? So think the size of maybe the top of a pencil or maybe the top of your brush, because with the scale that we're working in with the 4 by 4 inches, you want your dots to be pretty small. But some brush like this, you just kind of dip your paint or your brush in the paint. Notice I'm not really twirling it around. You can kind of wipe off the excess. So now my brush is loaded and I can make these individual dots. Now the harder I push down, the more kind of like splotches I'm going to get. So this demonstration, I'm going to use a lot more of a soft hand and kind of all at once strategically place a lot of dots where I want them. And it's important, at least for me, it's going to be a lot easier to work with my lighter colors first, the colors that are inherently more light, like my yellows, as opposed to starting out with the blue, because as we know with prismatic colors, your yellow's not going to sit nicely over your blue. It's just going to look green, right? Because, you need a lot more oomph in your color to get those colors to stand against it. So if you don't necessarily have a kind of messed up round brush, I have a little bit bigger of a round brush, but this one's a little nicer. It still has that fine tip, right? So remember when you twist and pull with your brush, you're going to get that nice tip. And then it's all about pressure, right? I can kind of individually make very, very tiny dots, and it's just as effective, right? So it depends on what kind of person you are. If you're one of those people that likes to kind of strategically place dots one at a time, maybe using a little bit more together of a round brush will give you the outlook or appearance that you're going for. So you have a lot more control about where each dot is placed. But if you're just, more of a little, how do I put this? Not necessarily a free spirit, but if this is too much focus for you, you can use something like this where the bristles are a little bit messed up and you can get dots all over the place at once, right? So using a small brush like that helps, but I have a flat brush as well that kind of has a similar thing where my bristles kind of spread apart. And you guys can see that just very, very light pressure. I'm almost getting more like dashes or lines, right? So something like that shape is good too. So if you don't necessarily love the dot aspect, you can use something that's a little bit more linear. So I have a picture that I'm going to start working on. It's a little duck, right? And on my computer screen back here, I have this little duck image that I'm going to reference. So I'm not going to go for the observed color that I see. I'm going to go for some more subjective color. Remember, with subjective color, it's kind of, more at the artist's discretion or imagination. You're using color less like the colors that you see, and color as a more kind of meaningful or abstract kind of way to add another like layer of meaning to your work. So I'm going to start with my lemon yellow. And I'm just going to kind of dip my bristles in. You're going to see me work really, really fast. I'm a pretty fast dabber when it comes to paint. So, if you're like wondering Do you have to work this fast? The answer is no. So I'm going to kind of start adding my yellow color, and I know yellow is really hard to see against the white, but I'm going to start assigning where I think I want some of my lighter tones, because inherently yellow is pretty light by nature, right? So I still want to stay true to like the tones and the shadows that I see, right? So the values that I see, but I'm going to change up some of the colors. So I'm going to go for more of like a pastel, maybe, you know, warm and sunny kind of duck, and less dramatic, right? So I'm working up some of these lighter tones, and I of course have white that I can always kind of go back and correct. I'm going to work with pure color first, right, and just kind of lay in some of these lighter areas that I see. I'm going to go up towards the cheek. Probably going to make my duck a little bit more kind of red and purple for fun, because what's life without a little whimsy? So with this technique, I'm going to give you guys two options as well. It'd be nice if you had all the time in the world to kind of let your acrylic paint sit and dry in between each color. Realistically, I like to kind of do this all in one go. So while I don't want you mixing colors on your palette before adding them on here, I do want you to kind of like just let the paint mix. If it's a little wet or if you're a little heavy-handed, it's fine if it mixes a little bit at a time, right? So I've got my lemon yellow down. Ooh, it looks like a hot mess right now. That's kind of what it's going to look like for a little bit. But I'm going to go for some of my more cadmium yellow. It's a little bit warmer of the two yellows. It's not as cool. So I'm going to start working in maybe some of those warmer tones up towards the top. The best thing about this process is that there's really no way you can totally screw up, right? Worst comes to worst, you can just paint it back white and kind of go from there. I'm going to give them a little warmth around the eye. And it's okay if your painting is a little bit more abstracted, right? Because that's the kind of point, right? With this optical mixing, it looks great from far away, but it's going to break down a little bit as you get super close. And so you just have to kind of be okay with that. I'm going to move on to my cadmium red. And obviously red is not a duck color, but we're going to roll with it. I've got a lot of like warmer brown tones in my duck, so I'm just going to add my red very, very slowly. See how I'm taking my time a little bit more? And you can see that that's already starting to kind of optically blend into more of an orange, right? Because my red by nature looks more like this, right? It's pretty red, right? So it can also be a nice thing if you have a little bit more water in your brush. Your paint's naturally going to thin out for you. It's also a really nice kind of calming project, not gonna lie. It's perfect for a rainy day like today. A little bit more red. I'm gonna space out some of my darker value colors a little bit more, right? Because what I don't want to do if I go fully all at once from the get-go, I might run into the problem that some of my lighter colors, like my yellows, are going to have a hard time working back in. So if you spread out your dots more, the more space, you know, the more the kind of colors blend optically, and you might get more of the appearance that you want, right? So that's why I'm kind of going a little bit slower with this darker color and really taking my time and building the tone up slowly. I'm going to switch to my cooler red. This is my crimson red, so it's more cool in temperature. Work that right on top. I like working with both kind of sets of primaries that we have for this painting, but you guys are welcome just to use like one at a time. Add a few dots here. Really kind of gonna get this darker patch. Hopefully you guys can kind of start to see something coming along, right? I know it looks like a lot of dots right now, and that's okay. So far this is what I have. Starting to get something going on. It's not quite what I want, but I'm rolling with it. So the next color I'm going to add is I'm going to start to add my ultramarine. I'm going to add that to some of my darker spaces because my blue by nature is a pretty dark value color. Ultramarine's not as powerful as my phthalo. I'm going to save my phthalo to last, but I'm really just going to use these dots sparingly because what I'm trying to do is make a purple. I don't necessarily want my blue to just stand out by itself, but I'm going to slowly start adding in some of these bluer marks, maybe just around the eye. You guys can see I'm kind of wiping my paintbrush off a lot. That's going to be helpful